Hello and welcome to the Podquest of Bread. My name is Henry Conley. Tonight I want to talk about the second characteristic of fascism again. Now, before we get into why I'm talking about it again, I want to mention a few countries and specific periods in time, and hopefully you'll connect the relevance of what's happening to these countries. So first I want to start with China, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, and Fascist Italy. Just to name a few countries. And most recently, Trump's America. Now, I'm talking about the second characteristic of fascism. I will read that after I read this little excerpt. And then I hope that you see the correlation between those countries named, Trump's America, the characteristics of fascism, and what is happening currently in this country. Now, Dawn Wooten, a licensed practical nurse, came forward with a whistleblower report of higher than usual rates of hysterectomies in America's concentration camps. She was quoted as saying that while some women may have required a hysterectomy, everybody's uterus cannot be that bad. What we are talking about here right now is a situation, potentially, where a whistleblower had to come forward to bring to light possible forced sterilization. That ties directly into those four countries that I named and many other countries that I could have named. But I picked those four because those are all fascist authoritarian dictatorships, or were. They are all countries who have been known to neglect people's basic human rights. There are countries that have been known to neglect the rights of the people and people who they have deemed as not equal to us, not equal to them, not equal to the commoner within the nation. The nationalistic idea of their country makes these people less worthy of human rights. Now, the second characteristic of fascism on the list of 14 characteristics, which I have spoke about a few times on this podcast, says disdain for the recognition of human rights. Because of fear of enemies and the need for security, the people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of need. The people tend to look the other way or even approve of torture, summary executions, assassinations, long incarcerations of prisoners, etc. What we are seeing right here in this whistleblower report from Dawn Wooten is essentially a disdain for the human rights of someone who has been deemed not equal to us. The Trump administration has been doing an excellent job at making sure that they put forth this idea that the immigrants coming over our borders illegally, the immigrants that they are detaining and separating in the concentration camps illegally, they are lesser than us. Their human dignity, their human rights do not exist. Within the report and within a few other now released reports, there are cases of 22 and younger, or 22-year-old and younger women having hysterectomies. Women between 22 and 40 having hysterectomies. Women who still wanted children being forced to have hysterectomies within Trump's concentration camps. And before anybody decides to go at me and say, well, Trump didn't start the camps, they started under Obama, I get that. Trust me, I get that. But they've gotten far worse under Trump's administration, under his fascist regime. And we are getting to the point where we are now violating human rights in our borders, in private concentration camps that are contracted through ICE. If there is ever a time to abolish ICE, the time is now. If there is ever a time to stand up against a fascist ruler, the time is now, because the characteristics seem to constantly repeat themselves. All 14 characteristics on repeat throughout this administration. The title of the podcast tonight is Characteristic Number 2, Again. And I say again very specifically because we have seen the basic human rights of immigrants being absolutely violated by the Trump administration on repeat throughout his entire administration's existence. From taking people and separating them at the border, from ripping their children away from mothers, fathers away from mothers, fathers away from children, and detaining them in literal concentration camps, by ignoring their health and their sanitary needs, by barely providing them the necessary nourishment to survive, by ignoring the risk of COVID spreading within these camps. We have seen on repeat characteristic number 2 in this administration. This administration has been absolutely sure to violate the human rights of these people. And why do they do it? Because loyalists to Donald Trump and loyalists to his fascist regime, they turn a blind eye to this. Because as they've been told by the regime, as they've been informed by Donald Trump, as they've been informed by the Republican Party, and as they've been informed by loyalists to the party and to the ruler and to the leader of the United States, they have been told that these people are lesser than you. They're not equal to you. They're lawless. They're violators of all our laws that keep us safe. They're inhuman. That's the idea that Donald Trump has tried to set forth about immigrants coming over the borders of the United States since day one, since before he even stepped into office, that they're inhuman, that they're lesser than us. Lesser than us, by the way, I want to specifically say they're lesser than the white Americans that he cares about so much. In fact, human rights abuses have been just a staple part of Donald Trump's entire presidency. God help us if he wins 2020. We will see these in far worse and far more drastic and dramatic ways. But back to these people. In characteristic number 2, it said, because of fear of enemies and the need for security. Donald Trump, from day one of his campaign, made these people coming over the border seeking refuge, seeking a safer life, trying to run away from countries that are war-torn and just ripe with violence and gang violence. These people have been made to be enemies of the United States since day one of Donald Trump starting his campaign. Donald Trump used this enemy to garner support for the idea of the border wall. He used this enemy to create a need for safety, that hasn't existed. See, the thing is, the people didn't pay attention to these immigrants coming across the border. They've been coming across our southern borders for years. There have been for years caravans coming towards the southern border, and no one felt the need for safety because these people were seeking refuge. It wasn't until Donald Trump started speaking with his rhetoric, with his fascist rhetoric, that laid down the groundwork for his fascist regime, where he is able to say that these people are the enemy and that we need safety. He's already, from the offset of his presidency, he was creating the need for characteristic number 2 to exist. He said, or to go on, the people in fascist regimes are persuaded that human rights can be ignored in certain cases because of need. That's the second line of characteristic number 2 in the 14 characteristics of fascism. The second line lays out the entire groundwork for how Donald Trump has approached these people. This entire groundwork towards where their human rights do and do not exist. Donald Trump has many times spoke of shooting immigrants as they come across the border, a violation of their basic human rights to life. Donald Trump has many times toyed with different ideas to violate them, to torture them, to detain them. And when I say torture, I'm not just meaning physical torture. I am meaning literal mental torture. Solitary confinement, separating them from their families, ripping a child from a mother's arms. These are all forms of mental torture. Donald Trump has played this game since day one, and he has set the groundwork for people to view immigrants. And I'm not just talking about illegal immigrants. Notice I haven't said the word illegal till now. He has set the groundwork for us to view immigrants as lesser than us. That has been his MO from the offset of his regime. He's set it up so that way people will look at these immigrants, no matter where they're coming in, but especially at the border, and believe that in this certain situation because they're lesser than us and they're violating our rules and they're coming into this country illegally. Ignore the fact that they have the legal right to seek refuge. These people are lesser than us and therefore their human rights are not equal to ours. I spend a lot of time within Trump groups. I spend a lot of time within pro-Trump groups, mainly because I try to bring fact to them. But with the release of this, I have seen within these Trump groups, many people completely ignoring the fact that these women are being sterilized. These women, especially at birthing ages, are being sterilized. These women that could potentially have a family are being sterilized. These Trump supporters don't care. They have no care in the world because these people are not equal to them. They're not the same as them. They're different. They're less than us. They're less than you. Because they're not American. Because they're not white. Because they're not born and raised in America. They're not equal. Characteristic number 2 continues to say, the people tend to look the other way or even approve of torture, summary executions, assassinations, long incarcerations of prisoners, etc. Now, the people looking away, I've already addressed that multiple times in this video. We are seeing that every day with Trump supporters where they look away from the human rights abuses of the fascist regime that is the Trump-Pence administration. Some would argue that we are seeing torture. I would argue we're seeing torture. I believe that we are seeing torture because there is no doubt in my mind that the physical torture of having a hysterectomy, a forced hysterectomy, the physical torture of worrying whether you're going to get COVID because you're not being provided the proper supplies to avoid COVID, the worries and of physical torture by fellow detainees in order to fight for the minuscule amounts of food because the natural fight or flight mechanism kicks in. The mental torture of having your child ripped away from you, your husband or your boyfriend or your wife or whatever you may have ripped away from your mom or dad dying in a quarter. Who knows what goes on in these concentration camps? That is mental torture. Summary executions. I would say that the detainees who have died in these camps, that might as well be classified as an execution by ICE. That might as well be classified as an execution by the fascist regime that is the Trump administration. That's all happening right now. You go on from there, you see that assassinations, we're not seeing assassinations, luckily, yet. But long incarcerations of prisoners, that is yet another part of the characteristic number 2. Long incarcerations. These people are being held in these camps. These people are being held and detained for undue amounts of time without probable cause, without having a chance to argue their case for refugee status. It fits all in with characteristic number 2. So, I always try to end these podcasts with, what do we do? How do we fix this? How do we fight for this? And I see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. I see a couple ways that we can do this. One, we take to the streets every chance we get, and we remind people that the fascist regime that is the Trump-Pence administration cannot exist in the United States of America. That the very existence of the Trump-Pence administration is a threat to democracy and freedom in America, peace in America, and peace in the world as a whole. The threat of the Donald Trump administration, the Mike Pence administration continuing on, and the fascist regime being solidified through another election, we stay to the streets and we stay out there reminding people that with them in office, none of us are safe. Some of us may be safer, but eventually they will come for us as well. That is the real fact we must face. What else do we do? We look at people like Representative Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and many others who are introducing bills and legislation to investigate these allegations. We support them. And we, as people, as dignified Americans who believe in democracy and freedom and peace, we need to be calling our representatives, our senators, and pushing them to take action. But remember, as I've said multiple times on this podcast, voting or lobbying your senator or your representative is only a small portion of it. Because in the end, more of them than not are bought by the corporate interests. More of them than not are owned by the private entities that own these private concentration camps that are contracted through ICE. So I revert back to the only thing that you can do, that only thing that is really effective, which is, again, taking to the streets and demanding that the fascist regime, that is Trump and Pence, be removed from office, that they get out. We demand that they be held liable for their human rights abuses in front of the United Nations. There is an entire United Nations Council dedicated to human rights abuses. If we make enough noise, that council could take action while they're still in office. And they must take action because Donald Trump and Mike Pence and their regime must be held responsible for these egregious violations of human rights. Characteristic 2 has been repeating. What other characteristics are going to repeat? Characteristic 14 has been repeating. What other characteristics are going to repeat that are going to make you finally stand up and say enough is enough? Out now. Trump, Pence, gone. Fascism will not exist in America. Stay beautiful, humans.